We'll call the meeting to order. It looks like we have a quorum, more than a quorum. So the first, I should say hello to everyone. The first thing on our agenda is really approval of the minutes.
Second.
It's been moved and approved, so probably any discussion?
Are the microphones on?
I can't hear. You gotta get your mic. Everyone individually has to get your mic pressed.
All right, so you can hear me now?
Hello.
Perfect.
Hello.
So we'll go back that we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of January 28th. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, under finance, there is the disbursements that we have. Is there any discussions, Steve, from you?
Move for their approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, they're approved. We have no leases, but there are projects. Steve, do you want to come to the lectern maybe, and we'll talk through these? The first one is the fiscal 2021 budget, which would start in July of this year, correct?
Correct, and as we went through last meeting, we kind of went through the whole recommended budget for you. I'm happy to take any questions, but don't intend to like rehash that in particular, seeking your approval for that tonight.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions on next year's budget? I know we spent a lot of time last month, so. Bill?
I just want to point out the fact that the biggest change in the last couple of years has been the rents. And the person standing right there is the person who's responsible for keeping everything rented. He's worked hard at it. We should be thankful of it.
Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor of the budget, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This was unanimous. Congratulations, Steve, on your work.
Thank you very much.
It's an ongoing process. About the time you anticipate full occupancy, you get news that someone's leaving or there's some other adjustment, and so as those things happen. Right, that's right. That's a good point, a good way to look at it, Carl.
The Freight House, actually.
Your mic's off.
Lori gonna talk to you?
Yeah, yep. Actually, I just wanted to ask Lori Beeman, the executive director with the Freight House Farmers Market, to sort of join me up here at the lectern to talk through, to provide the commission with a little bit of an update in really three areas. Some exciting things happening with the Freight House Farmers Market, and so we'll kind of break it out in these thirds: the exterior piece and some improvements there, and then the indoor farmers market, and then the deli piece as well, or the former deli adjacent space. And so the one thing I wanted to lead off with, and then Lori's prepared to talk about some of the other areas, but the Keene, as all of you know, the outdoor market, hugely successful, Saturdays 8 to 1, Sundays 10 to 2, and on Wednesdays 4 to 8, starting May 2nd this year and running through October. There currently is the indoor market that runs year round. It has been shifted, and she'll provide a little bit more about that. But the outdoor market this year, if any of you, all of you have been there, there's the market in part of the Freight House lot, and then the other part is in the eastern part of what we call the Florian Keene lot. And due to both safety issues, which I'll talk a little bit about here in a second, as well as some increased desire for visibility off River Drive, the idea is to shift the Freight House lot vendors, or at least that space, over and then occupy in its entirety the Florian Keene lot. Okay, so then you basically have parking for the Freight House. What we notice happens a lot from a safety standpoint is twofold. One is off Ripley Street, coming into the Freight House, people will circle for 25 minutes to find the one spot that's never going to, become available in any time frame. And so the idea, while this may not, it becomes a congestion issue for the Freight House lot, because we have to create, we have to make these barricades and manage that. And sometimes people literally, I'm telling you, they'll park right in the turnabout, and so the idea is to not have to do that. The spots, there's 198 spots in the Freight House lot. Keep it fills, you'll still have some circle, but the idea is to gain more parking there, and then to shift all of the vendors and to create a new layout, an exciting new layout, where you have a central area of food trucks and, kind of flanked on the around it by vendors and some new, and with that comes, when people get moved a little bit, that there's some uneasiness. And so the board, and Lori in particular, are working very diligently with all vendors to make sure that they understand the higher purpose here. It was 2008 when we involved ourselves to under the auspices of creating a better market, but it was really safety that primarily drove our motivation here. And it becomes that same kind of setting today, where we can make an enhanced, more safe environment by moving into the lot. Now, I'll add another reason does stem from the Canadian Pacific rail line elevation, because when that happened, we lost and continue to have the loss of any egress into off of Gaines Street and the Florian Keene lot. And we know that happened last year, and traffic stacked in the Keene lot. And so you ended up having pedestrians, vendors, pedestrians, cars stacking. We worked with traffic engineering, to do the timing a little different, so people had extra time to walk north across River Drive at Western. And so this year we know that while that will be, an egress is part of the plan of Gaines, once that's reconfigured, the rail line, the railroad through there, that it's going to be the end of the season, because it cannot be done before the baseball season starts in early April. And so it will have to be towards the latter part of the season. So they'll go again, the market, through an entire season. Now, next year it eases up, but I think in this plan could, while initially trying to respond to that, I think actually makes, and I think vendors will find and customers will find it much more appealing. You are now with parking under, a whole bunch of parking underneath the Centennial Bridge and beyond, right? You don't feel like that's so far away and we encourage people to park in that vast amount of parking. Well, now if Gaines is right there and the market is, right on the other side of the street, I think it's not counterintuitive that people will park there and feel like they're not walking blocks away. And so there's all of these reasons that we're doing this. Lori, you may want to add, some things and then talk about some of those other pieces.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be here and talk to you a little bit about it. We're actually very excited. There's some amazing, exciting things happening down in the whole Freight House district and down on the Riverfront. So we're really pleased. We're very thankful the city is redoing our boardwalk. That's in the process of getting done right now. And like Steve said, we are looking at doing that relocation. I could probably elaborate a little bit more, because I'm boots on the ground every Saturday during that market day, and I spend a lot of time down on Western directing traffic, really seeing how many close calls we had, because people at the market, they're looking well beyond where they're walking. They're not even paying attention to the fact that there's cars coming and going. We had a lot of people that were just, road rage, because they've been waiting so long to get in there, and then the light would turn and we'd be stacked up. It was not a good situation. And although we'd actually been talking for a couple of years through our strategic plan that would possibly be a direction we were going, this has just pushed it along a little bit quicker for us because of the safety issues. We are also fortunate enough right now due to a grant from the Scott County Regional Authority, doing a remodel of the inside of our Freight House Farmers Market. Right now, there's no vendors inside. We've actually partnered with one of the other businesses in the Freight House, Antonella's 2, who is normally not open until 11 o'clock on Saturdays, who's allowing us to go in, utilize the space for our vendors. And we've really found that that partnership together has been good for both businesses. It's really brought them a lot more exposure. Our folks are there, they're still coming and shopping. And so it's the best situation that we could have, and I think it really shows that together down there at the Freight House, if we all start to work together, we can do some really great things. And so we're really excited about that. We are a few weeks out from the completion of our project inside and bringing our vendors back in. But we did kind of a top the floor painting, did some reconstruction. The idea is we want to take the indoor market and give it a little bit of a more city market feel. We want it to eventually get to a place where it stands on its own, that it doesn't need the outdoor market to be in process for people to coming down there to it. And Dee was involved with our strategic planning when we did it, and the indoor market was a big part of that strategic planning. And so everything we're doing was based on the information we received out of the strategic plan. So you're gonna see fresh greens in there year round. You're gonna see more vendors that are very unique to the area. You know, we're really trying to find those people that are gonna draw people down day in and day out and still be very interesting and for our out-of-town guests who come in to do it. There's so much happening on the riverfront. We want to be front and center when the Viking comes in. We want them to come and this be a really cool stop for them and really quintessential Quad Cities, something that's a good stop. So it's very important to us that we look at the big picture. I mean, we focus on what we do at the farmer's market, but we want it to be a bigger picture. And that kind of brings me a little bit to the deli. We're still moving forward. We're excited. There's construction and things going on in there. We are just for, I think the purpose of protection, looking at doing a different 501c3 to run that as kind of an offshoot. So each of those will have, you know, where we feel like the farmer's market has to be really focused on that, this will allow us to maybe broaden our focus to beyond that, what we can do for that whole Freight House district here with some of, you know, that, those funds that we incorporate out of that 501c3. So it doesn't always have to be put back into the farmer's market. If we can do something to help the whole Riverfront district with those funds, then we can do that. So that'll be coming down the pike. That's all in the process of being done right now, but that gets some little added protection for both places. So, did anybody have any questions or thoughts or?
Well, when Steve was speaking, so all access to the, pardon me, there we go. All access to the lot directly adjacent to the Freight House will be from Ripley Street. And then
So the
Ripley,
idea,
Scott, Western Gaines.
right. So right
And
now.
there'll be no access to the Florian Keene lot from Western because it will be vendors from
There'll be no car traffic.
Scott to Gaines. So there'll be no Brown Street entrance at all. Is there pedestrian access sort of catawampus out of the Centennial parking lot? They don't have to walk all the way back up to River Drive to turn around and come back into the lot, do they?
Correct. Right, there's a cut through.
There's a
And then it will
pedestrian
be
cut
made
through.
Better after that
And
is
it's getting
redesigned.
better.
Right,
It'll get
right,
better by spring. Okay.
Right,
Is that about where it is, the midpoint of the parking lot?
very close to that.
I usually eat lunch down there at least once a week, but I don't get to the far side of the parking lot all that often.
I think one.
That's all my.
I think one point too, I may have missed, I don't know if you stated it too, but this also allows for greater area to stage some special events. Lori does a terrific job of reaching out into the community and pulling different groups and activities in to try to animate the farmer's market on any given day. And so this helps kind of have an area that is a go-to area, which then also connects in with what I alluded to at the last meeting, that in a future CIP, we've been working with Alderman Grip and council on looking at beefing up some of the electrical, not just for market, but this area becomes a very highly visible area to stage some kinds of events that fit there. If we bolster some electrical, we already have electrical there. We need to increase some of it. It requires a little bit of some funding in order to, we've got to kind of go under the ground, and the transformer needs to be added. We need to bolster the amount that's there, but in so doing, we can reduce the sound pollution from some of these generators. No one likes that experience when you come into a situation, into an environment like this, a fair or the Christkindl Market or something like that, and then have all these, at the very entrance, having all this sound and pollution. And so that all is part of this. And hopefully, in the next couple of years, that piece can be realized. But we're starting this year with this move, this shift a little bit.
Would it help you if you operated some type of shuttle from the west of the Centennial Bridge?
It would. I mean, we've talked about that quite a bit of shuttles, or if we can do something with golf cart shuttles, those kind of thing. At this point, I think we're trying to figure out a way of just doing a pickup area where we have a couple of areas with a tent and somebody posted there where you can bring your cart, bring your gear, pull up, load your vehicle, and go.
Almost like a valet.
Like a valet parking, a little, where they, you're not having to haul all your bags of goods to your car. If you have a little bit of a walk, then you can just pull up and pick it up. So, we talk about it. It's always a matter of manpower for us and funding. Both equally tough for us.
My second question, Steve, is where are we on the reconstruction of the deck on the south side of it?
I'm glad you asked. Very exciting. We got underway a little more than a week ago and started on the east end with the upper level deck. That has been completed, and we are moved on to the east end of the main level deck, which we'll do in kind of quarters. We'll go right up to the mid-April timeframe that we wrote into the bid specs for this, and so we want to be finished, weather permitting, but we really have the goal of being finished with the entire project, before the outdoor market season gets underway just a short time later. But it is, if you haven't driven down there, do so. I mean, it's quite a project. It's an important project. People are excited about it. We're working with all of our tenants to make sure that we minimize any sort of disruption, but we have contemplated those things as far as access. In fact, we built a accessible ramp that you can see going into the diner off Ripley Street, because there's 4 steps there, and there was really while the deck is being done, there's no accessible access. And so that was part of it. That's a temporary thing that will come down once we finish. But they're fortifying joists, the framework, and then the decking is a composite, just like council and we wanted. We want it to be long lasting. We want this investment to be long lasting, and the railing, I think, will be the exciting part for everyone. I hope you share my enthusiasm about it, because you remember that the railing had been less tubular green, kind of horizontal. It is now going to be sort of 8 rows of horizontal galvanized cabling, like I would call it a nautical cabling kind of thing. So there's that nod to the river, and I think that people are really going to respond well to this. I think it's an exciting addition to the Freight House, and the businesses will, I know they appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right.
Yeah, I ate lunch down there last Wednesday and was watching them build the balcony deck, and it's looking really nice. And the access in and out of the diners, yeah, fine, you know. I mean, it's obviously under construction, so.
These are week and a half to 2 week
Yeah.
inconveniences.
Yeah.
And everyone, we communicate along the way, the next step in the time frame, and we're moving along. The next, if you really want to see, once they start laying the planking down, next week, probably early next week, possibly later this week, you'll be able to see the difference, because you'll start seeing the completion of the first, phase, and then as the railing comes in, and then you'll be able to see it. So I would say inside of a week and a half to 2 weeks will be a really fun time to check things out, how the rest of it's going to begin to look too. So.
Strategic plan, River West.
Yeah, so while I'm up here, I'll just try to
Keep
go
going.
through, tick off some of these other things, but River West, an exciting piece of our strategic plan. This is, for those of you maybe forgotten, this is the area I would downstream from the Crescent Bridge, the Veterans Memorial Park, to and including Credit Island, and on down to as far as you want to go, but make sure we're including Nahant Marsh, and for these purposes, even Water Pollution Control Center, and I'll get to that in just a second. But we're pretty excited about this because I met with, there was a group of some stakeholders talking about some issues related to Credit Island. I think some of those things have made their way here. But I met with that group along with the Parks Director, Chad Dyson, last Thursday. Michael was there. And the idea of having to help realize or craft our strategic plan item of River West, and to ensure that we satisfy the Corps of Engineers' desire to help us on developing the causeway and what might happen there. We know some of the feedback we received on the scoring when we didn't receive the initial funding for this, but can go back in, related to more stakeholder involvement and all of that. And I would say that through this initiative, which I'm recommending having a professionally facilitated group, and in this case, the same ones that we used for our development of our strategic plan, we would use that, have something that would be an agenda item all the time here, but that we would have a very diverse stakeholder group of a planning group that would look at, I'd say, 3 components, maybe more, but the causeway, the park itself, because there's a lot of those folks in parks, on the Parks and Rec Advisory Board that are interested in, after some of the flooding, what does that look like? Many of us see an ecotourism kind of flair to the park, along with use of the lodge, of course, and things like that. But it needs to be talked about and ideas vetted so that we can move forward in that area. And then I'd say lastly, all along River Drive, that experience, I'll call it, right? So that we've been visited before about a beach, right? Or cleanup even in this area, thinning of the trees. All of those things need to be talked about publicly, right? So this is that facilitated effort where we can do that, where we can have even focus groups and we can reach out into the public, something that honestly we all talk about being a major core function of this body. This is one of those initiatives that I think we can spend much of this year doing, and hopefully by the fall, having some core funding requests ready for us to insert into the CIP. And so I think that process should be robust, and I think there's a lot of people, stakeholders, that we've identified that can be that are going to be very happy to be part of that. And so, do you have anything? Yeah, sure.
I think Carl has a question.
You bet.
Well, this sounds very exciting, Steve. Bravo on developing this. Are you suggesting that the commission conduct public hearings under the auspices of this plan, incorporating these stakeholders? Are you talking about, you know, a Dan Ebner-led charrette that we had for our strategic plan a couple of years ago? I mean, I'm trying to, can you elaborate on the concept for us a little, please?
Still trying to kind of flush some of that out, but I would say to this, Kevin James, who's a co-owner, if you will, with Dan Ebner in that group, I've engaged with him and sought a proposal, and basically, you know, the idea would be to have a planning group, a core group of, you know, under probably 10 people that would represent various people. In fact, you know, Parks and Rec, Riverfront Improvement Commission, Friends of Credit Island, you know, I see, you know, River Action, some environmental kinds of interests, and that they would help, they would be the planning committee, but I believe that this body owns this because it's our strategic plan, but recognizing the need that needs to be, one of the main things that we need to satisfy through this is that reaching out to stakeholders, okay? And not just sort of saying, inviting them to a meeting, but actually having them around the table, much like we often like to be invited to. And so I've thought a lot about it, that there's a hybrid opportunity here where we own it, but and each month it's more than even a report. I think there'll be some engagement opportunities even at our meetings. But I think that having a planning committee that is actually not just of one body, but rather have a diverse makeup is beneficial to the overall cause here as well.
So how far down the road with this are you at this point?
Proposal?
Proposal.
Getting-
And Kevin James
getting-
has got Kevin James is a familiar name. He's a business owner, and no? I'm thinking of somebody else in that case. Thank you.
But it is that same group that we've used before,
Okay.
but just maybe a different face.
So Steve, what is the time frame that you're thinking it would like start and finish kind of time frame?
I believe we should be up and running in early April and try to be completed by the end of the year with some deliverables, if you will, per vis-a-vis the funding. Time period is always like October, early October. So I see that this taking 2020 from April through the end of the year, but deliverables for inclusion, possible inclusion into the CIP, at least for the, I mean, if not for the next year, getting them in for within the next 4 or 5, right?
So the funding that we were sort of hoping to be part of previously that we didn't have enough stakeholder buy-in. What was the timing of when that application for that type of funding?
Yeah, so
happened?
we had been asked to participate or been made aware of that funding opportunity just before the deadline. And so we kind of hurriedly with the Corps put something together. And we got some nice feedback, but as I understand it, it's every 2 years.
Right.
But, so that's November?
Yeah, but it's
But
every
it'd
2
be
years.
every
So we
2
gotta wait
years.
another
Right,
year and a
but-
half, basically.
But again, not wasted opportunity that we can blend some of these needs. Parks needs some feedback, I think, and some planning help, if you will, for the park itself, right? You know, and its future. But then we can also take the opportunity to look at the causeway question, which many of us have been interested in and continue to be. Even if that time frame isn't ideal, you know, as far as a couple years away, I think we will be creating a lot of the tools that will prepare us for that eventual submission.
And I would assume there may be some other funding opportunities in
course.
between
Absolutely.
now and then that we could pursue using what we get out of this.
Right,
Okay,
and this
thank
does
you.
tie into a larger context. I mean, the city's going after mitigation funds for the water pollution control plant because I won't get into it all here, but there's a lot of sedimentation going in from the causeway and Black Hawk Creek, and you know, all of this is interrelated, and we are a part of that. And this process will, I think, inform and educate many to that involvement, to that connection.
I see, you know, as we talk, you know, I think we focused, because we talked about, you know, the Park Advisory Committee on that area of the West, but there's much more there. And after listening to the discussion and the RFP that's going out from the city to look at flood issues along the 9 miles and what's possible, what's mitigation, one of the things that's kind of important is to have those conceptual uses. So not just for a CIP, but what is this stretch of half a mile, quarter mile? What is our vision of what that would be? That informs if what kind of flood protection it needs. And I think that discussion has never, from the Crescent Bridge to Credit Island, really been discussed. What is that? Is that what it looks like? You know, do we want to own that one piece of land? And so I see that the stakeholders are broad. And, you know, Carl, frankly, in some of this, holding an opportunity for public just to come to talk to us is probably a good idea,
Absolutely.
you know?
I think it's always a good idea.
Yes, but I mean, thinking through that when we talk about this framework, that we put that in place so we know that that's part of the process. So I think that's important. So would we then see maybe from you an RFP next month?
Well, the amount is it's manageable.
Yeah, it's not
and
the
so-
amount I'm worried.
Right, and
I'm
so we would
thinking-
share this 50/50 with Parks. I've talked to them about that.
funding
The funding for it, we're talking about our part being, you know, under $2,000, maybe under 1,500, actually.
For the
Facilitator.
Right, right.
But
Is that adequate? I mean, is that to hold a public hearing, or is that to do?
Well, we can always, that's the,
Or what is it?
that's my question.
that's for 4 different facilitation meetings, plus I think at least 2 focus groups. And they're $250 a pop. So we could always add, you know, to some of this. Some surveying, so like some actual casting the net much wider. And then obviously having
Opinion
public
survey.
meetings and public hearings. Yes, opinion survey, right. Yeah, no, that's right. Opinion surveys, they cost less. They hurt more, but they cost
Well,
less.
so I think that was my point. Are we going to see kind of what the proposal is, what the services are offered? That was more, I think, my intent for us to become familiar with than.
I will send that out. I have a proposal.
May I add, on the survey question, can we do I don't want to limit the survey to a respondent-initiated online survey. That I know the city seems to be enamored of them in the moment, but I think the survey of the citizenry needs to be, particularly the West End citizenry, may need to be broader than just simply a self-initiated online survey.
And
A respondent-initiated online survey.
And while I agree, that might increase some costs, just so we
Yeah, it
know
might.
going into
That
it.
might.
Not substantially,
Yeah, it
but I
might.
think it might, just so we know then, I mean, I
Right.
think we're fine with that. I don't think, you know, anyone would suggest otherwise. I think we can handle that throughout the next fiscal year. Yep, okay, thank you. Okay, anything else? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I just have a comment. Well, I was at that meeting as well.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
And there was a handout, and I think to maybe just paraphrase it for the rest of us who went through our strategic planning for what we went through with the Riverfront Improvement Commission a couple of years ago, the 25, I think it was 25, on the handout that we received, it was like $2,500 to go through the process of this group, this committee, whatever you want to call it, that's going to be working with River West. It would be a process just like we went through for the strategic planning, and the 2,500 is for this Kevin and his group to lead us through that process just like we went through. I mean, that's, in a nutshell, is kind of what we're talking about as far as expenses. And I kind of see this group as like you said, we kind of own that River West. We coined that phrase, I suppose, but it's like having another group do our legwork, so to speak. It's just another group that's going to help us guide through that whole process, is how I see it.
I think when I hear the words own it, I think what I hear is that as individual members here, unlike we have a task force out there that comes back, we're going to stay actively, individually involved, because I think there's just so many parts of this, actually, than just like I said, like Credit Island, there's pieces. It's like Busey Landing. And what is Busey? What is the public portion of South Concord?
Right.
What do we want it to be?
That's right.
I mean, do we just want it to be a mud hole there, or, you know, what is the vision? I mean, what project can we do with the core? Because it really may not be all that much, but it may be river infrastructure that then allows that to, you know, be an asset, right? And so that's the kind of, and that's why I think our stakeholders have to be broad, especially Nahant Marsh. I see that group coming towards, taking on a larger sustainability environmental role along River West. If that's what we're thinking there is a lot of it is passive enjoyment of the river and a way to make that sustainable and usable and attractive and kind of a very interesting place to be. We need people who are into that knowledge and wants to broaden that. We need other not-for-profits.
Absolutely.
That have an educational sustainability mission to what they're doing in this
And to tie into
section
their
of our
master
river.
plan as well. I mean, they have done some master planning recently as well.
Absolutely.
And so to tie, to make sure we're made aware of what's going on or what their thoughts are next year or even in 20, you know, their hopes and aspirations.
And how we can build on that on the
Exactly.
river side of that.
Well, I think, and to piggyback on that comment, Dee, is that at this same meeting, we had a couple of gentlemen who were very, very detailed in, like, for example, they have surveyed Credit Island and they came up with, I don't know, 200 and 400 and some species of plants that are on Credit Island, and we're very knowledgeable, and some of them were very, very rare and rarely found in this area. And I mean, I'm not into that at all, but it's almost got me excited. Hey, I want to go see those special plants, you know, and let's take a tour and let's generate some public to get them down there to see some of these special plants. And so I think that's kind of what, you know, yeah, there's a lot of things that can go into this that we're maybe not on the top of our list right now, but certainly with some people that have some expertise like these gentlemen and what they talked about can get some people excited about the river down there.
And that's exactly what I think, where we fell short with our first core submission, is we didn't have enough stakeholders and what we want to do. And one of the things they basically said is, you know, sustainability here. You got this area that floods all the time, so you really have to think about what can be there when it's not flooding. How can it flood with the least amount of damage to what you would like to interpret? And how do you go forward with that kind of project? So I think that's where kind of the interesting way we're headed. All right.
Exciting stuff.
We want to change gears and come to Union Station?
Sure. So, Union Station. Oh,
There's some basic parameters that have to be answered before any group can decide what to do. For example, along River Drive, if you go on the recreation trail, there's a dip. That dip is there because that was how they settled the wetland issue right there. So as you go downstream, all the wooded areas, we got to have a decision from the DNR and the Corps, is that a wetland or isn't it not a wetland?
Right.
I mean, you to decide what you're going to do in the slough, you've got to know whether that material in the slough is contaminated or not contaminated. Those questions, there's nobody can sit at a session and try to do things if you don't know what you can do with the basic answers.
And we would reach out, those would be partner stakeholders in all of this, and ensure that we open lines of communication and ask those questions and have that engagement, most definitely.
Well, before we leave that, one more.
Okay, Carl.
So, where are we vis-a-vis the Corps of Engineers, the proposal for opening the sluice, vis-a-vis the, I know you just said that it was November 2021 before you're going to be able to go back for a funding round on the Credit Island Causeway development plan. But, you know, is that a core priority? Are we?
Where we currently are, I mean, this is our response, I think. This process that we've just been talking about is our response to providing that project or that initiative with some momentum, with some additional, you know, steam, rather than it just sitting there and not doing anything. I think this helped. This was crafted not by just out of the strategic plan line item, and to check it off that Steve, you know, wanted, you know, make sure to be accountable to it. but out of that as well, to help with the core, to meet some of the core parameters that, because otherwise, right now, we basically received no funding, some
Right, so
feedback
are
that
we,
we gotta do
continuing
something.
dialogue with them on this
Right,
topic?
absolutely.
We are, very
And,
good.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and one of the first
absolutely.
things that they fund, and they can fund it 100%, is feasibility.
Feasibility.
Right.
But what we haven't shown is really a
Any-
stakeholder group that
Right.
wants this, I mean, we
Is gonna
haven't
get us
shown
there.
that
That's
next
gonna be
thing.
a product of this, I think,
Yeah.
that we can get there.
Beyond just us.
Absolutely. Yep.
All right, thank you very much. That's clear. More clear.
So on Union Station, from the interior standpoint, we're nearing completion from the restoration work. We basically just have some of many of the doors are getting refinished and or replaced, and they've been on order. And so while Visit Quad Cities has begun the process of moving back in, they're doing an opening later this spring. They're getting ready to do their build out on the first floor of Union Station, and simultaneously we are finishing up with the door project. On the outside, on the exterior, we have been working, continue to work diligently with Graham. You'll recall that we've given reports, we've seen preliminary design plans for this area. They're working, we're all working to be engaged with the Canadian Pacific crossing projects as well, especially because in the Union Station area, we basically have Ripley and Harrison, and it specifically affects the driveway on the south. We've talked about this at this meeting. It's not yet resolved as far as the berming, and we're actually meeting again tomorrow, having a conference call to kind of work through some of these things, but we are attempting to get everyone, the city, Graham, the Canadian Pacific folks, all on the same page so that we can actually demonstrate that there's a savings of money if we do some things that would benefit our tenants and some of what we are wanting to see happen as it relates to that area, Union Station area. So you'll recall that there are actually kind of two phases here, or at least two thoughts. One is a repair and replace that is FEMA reimbursable. We're trying to get as much out of that piece that then doesn't have to be undone. None of it should have to be undone, but can all layer into an eventual, hopefully, mitigation project that we still have to present and go through that whole separate process with FEMA to seek and receive funding for. And so what there's a lot of work on the front end to piece all this together and layer it, but I think hopefully that work will all pay off. At the very least, if a mitigation project isn't in the cards at this time or, at all, the repair and replace will be one that hopefully will be as robust and inclusive as possible, especially as it relates to the new levels of grade and what's caused there by the crossings at Ripley and Harrison Street. So we continue to talk to our tenants, and for example, Taste of Ethiopia parks on the north side. Their only entry to their restaurant is from the south side, and so we need to always be mindful of that during times of flooding or times of non-flooding time frame. So all of that continues to be discussed and worked through. And like I said, we have another session tomorrow. So anything on that you want to add, Dee?
No, we're hoping to get the temporary repairs out and done before the flood, because it gives us the concrete to go, to put the HESCOs on. Right. Because the HESCOs are still going to be the way that building's protected on all sides until we get a berm or a flood wall in place. So it's kind of important for us to get a few of these kinks kind of worked out so that project can be approved, right, by FEMA, and then really the repairs, we can go out for bid.
I would just, if you're okay, go on to the next line, since I've alluded to Canadian Pacific Railroad crossings a bit anyway. We have the joint group made up of commissioners and council members has you know, is continuing to meet. Actually, we've begun to pivot from a little bit of the railroad discussions back to our original purpose on some of the areas of focus and commission standard operating procedures and how we can be relevant and useful to the city and the city council, right? But I would say that specifically to the railroad crossings, staff has received a couple weeks ago, received partial design plans, something near 90%, but they are not all 90%, so I don't like saying that. Partial design plans that contain a lot of information, 178 pages, by the way, very technical stuff, but include a lot of feedback that staff, this work group, others have participated in, and staff, public works mostly, you know, traffic engineers, I mean, across the board, you know, Zach, myself, many of us participated in providing some feedback that might have been either lacking or missed or needs clarified. I mean, there must be over 100 comments, you know, related to those, and some are more significant than others. But that was just, that exercise has been done individually and then collectively, and then yesterday, all that was sent back, that feedback was sent to Canadian Pacific. And that's where we stand today as far as well on our way, but not finished to begin to allow the construction documents to be issued. So I think they'll take, I assume, several days to review all of those. There'll be some back and forth with staff. Ultimately, council will see a final product, I'm sure, and hopefully we don't take a whole lot more time and start getting to bid, especially with Marquette and, you know, even River Heritage Park, some of the ones that are not as, you know, cumbersome or controversial. Get going on some of those areas, because it's going to take the entire season, construction season, to get this accomplished. And I don't think any of us want to see another year where we have the temporary situation or the inaccessibility to some of our riverfront. And so the good news is, I think generally, there's a lot of answered questions already, right? I mean, they've been responsive to a lot of the feedback, but there are still some things. I'll give you an example. Councils and we are concerned about, now that we've elevated the rail line, the rec trail has been agreed to also be elevated. What happens in between, right? You know, we need proper drainage or filling that area in. I mean, so that's just one side example, important, but something that we need to come to agreement on, so that we don't have pooling water between those areas all along a major part of the riverfront. This would be, you know, from essentially Ripley upstream. And so that's one example of many that we're still in discussions about.
So I was reading and watching on television the announcement that we had succeeded in getting agreement from Canadian Pacific to raise the recreational trail. And, you know, like a child thinking he'd gotten a Christmas gift, I thought maybe that was going to be, I did not realize we were still negotiating for a swale between the two structures, their raised track and our raised trail. So that's not part of the agreement as it has been developed up to this point.
I don't think we've seen, we have literally not seen the aerial view
Correct.
cross-section of how they're going to treat it. We haven't
Correct.
seen that detail in the plan.
We're
While they
moving
said
towards
90%, I think that, again, it's
I thought
probably,
90% referred more to the crossings than the development.
well, it's all
It's
of
the
that.
whole-
I mean,
all
about
the
the
plans.
drawings, they're not there yet. So that still needs to be seen.
But we're not there, but I think that kind of information, making sure that feedback is given to them, is provided, that the next time we see this, we want that
Yeah,
addressed.
that's-
I mean, I think that's where you're going.
Right.
That's certainly where the city is
Right.
at this point too. We can't have these water-filled valleys. I don't even know what they would be. They would be stinkholes. They would be mosquito and stinkholes, I mean, is what they would be, yeah. Is there anything else? I have one thing then, while I'm up here, I'd like to talk about. Yesterday, I went to the Design Review Board to have a brief work session with them on using the rail car at the possibility. Before I got this started, I wanted to talk to them and you all about how people felt about using the rail car, the north side specifically of the Freight House, for some signage, like for example, a wrap of the rail car that would assist a couple of our businesses down there that have very little signage. We don't have funding, no one really does, for a monument sign, plus the monument sign there's not room. You wouldn't see it, but if you're heading west, you would not even see it heading east if you placed it at Ripley and River Drive. Corner signage, or we don't want the whole building to be like it. If you all remember, prior to our ownership, there was, Balls and Pucks was one place. I mean, they just had Ripley Street Grill. They had all this sign, every place you could imagine. You barely saw that the building was a brick. It was all signage. We don't want that. Corner signage is really nice, but it's also very costly, okay? And so the idea that I have been circulating with many, including the tenants, is some sort of signage using that wrap. Well, yesterday I sat around this table with Design Review Board members without first submitting any application, just wanting some feedback, and wanted to know from them what they thought. And the feedback was very positive, and they came up with this idea about some sort of wrap, like akin to like buses, I guess is the best description. Something that you'd still know that this is a rail car, but you'd be able to have the logo-esque signage, tastefully done, but kind of coordinated with a couple of I'd say there's about 3 businesses that would be interested in this. I don't know if you're down there at night, but we just recently changed out the light bulbs and got the electrical working at the exterior on that rail car. It actually is illuminated now at night, and it looks pretty cool. Channel 8 does this, their Eagle Eye or whatever, and so that's how I sometimes check before I go to bed and make sure everything's okay at the Freight House, because I can see down there with the camera, but it really is illuminating. The rail car is pretty good. And so I think that because those of us who are familiar with the Freight House know the gem that happens as you turn, and then you have the view of the river and what awaits you with Leclerc Park and all of that, right? It's very exciting. But if you don't know, even if you're from here, I'm not just saying new people, there are people from here that don't get that. You're on River Drive, you're in that corridor between essentially Western and Ripley, right? It's just a big old building, right? I mean, it's just a big old building. Now, we tried to do some things as it relates to the murals and some of that stuff, but I think that this tastefully done signage is one more thing to help pique interest, and hopefully people turn the corner and come down, enjoy the new deck, right? So I wanted to report that back to you. I intend to follow up. I've reached out to a sign place today just to kind of get an idea of what we're talking about, and I think it's attainable to contemplate moving forward with something like this. So are there any questions about that?
No, I do have a different question.
Sure.
The RFQ, right, for the Main Street Landing Playground area
Design competition.
is still at council, correct? And it goes.
Yes, it will be voted on tomorrow night. It's in the cycle on a discussion, as a discussion agenda item, and then the vote will be tomorrow night.
And then the length of that time that it goes out looking for, I think the way that works, there's 3 vendors that are 3 consultants that are used. That the length of time is about how long?
Oh, that it would be on the street?
Well,
Or
till you pick them, till you pick the 3. Is that a couple of
do you
months?
have, is it about 4 or 5 weeks, 4 weeks?
Yeah, it would be like April, May.
Yeah, I'm going from memory, but yeah, April.
Go down to 3 to 5.
Those 2 months.
Okay.
Probably August or September.
So there's some interviews.
No.
So, I was just gonna say, so there's, from now until so going out on the street, and then there'll be interviews, the selection process, and I think what we're talking about in August is having it pretty well selected by then, the firm.
The firm, so it goes out, aren't 3 of them going to actually display their thoughts? to
Yeah,
the
so
public, so
that,
that's
that
in the summer.
becomes, I don't have this in front of me, tell me
Yeah,
the
I'm just asking.
timetable for that.
So I guess
Sorry.
my question here, it really kind of relates to the rest of the landing, especially the landing between the parking lot, the dam, where we have the fishing area, to the Sky Bridge. This piece is going to most likely be elevated. And I was just wondering, in a parallel concert, should we get a feel, just like we're wondering what's going to be between the bike path and the railroad, shouldn't we think and wonder the costs of what between this elevated playground and those two other segments? I feel like I'm really gung-ho on the idea of doing this piece, but I think there needs to be some planning and some thought about elevation for that whole section that's more than just this quarter block. And so, I come from, unfortunately, I just probably come from a road grading perspective, or, hey, we're talking about doing construction, and then on both sides about do construction, and how we're gonna funnel them with fencing through the bike path with people riding a bike down to the playground. How are we gonna do this other portion? And to me, that's not really in this RFQ, because it's more looking for the style and the look and the whatever. It's more of these other pieces that are kind of outside of that scope. And is there a parallel work that needs to be done? And I think I've said this on a number of occasions. Shouldn't we just be thinking that everything should be at the elevation of 22 feet if we're going to build anything on the south side of the tracks? And if we are that, what does that really mean to us? I mean, what is those kind of costs here in this particular area? It's sort of like you're in the, I don't know, I just think of my home, and I got to traipse through these two areas that are undone. I finished this, and then when I want to do that, I can't get to the piece that I've just accomplished, because the railroad is going to close access, right, at Perry for people and cars. There's going to be only people access at Brady. And so there's this, when all this work takes place once we have the playground up and everybody's having a great time at it, what happens? So I just would like you to talk with Public Works, maybe think through that. I think there's a little bit more of, shouldn't we be endorsing some elevation plans here and figuring out that they will work for Main Street Landing on the south side of the railroad track? And this is just me by myself, but it's just kind of my mechanical brains thinking that there needs to be some work here. And I don't think that it's like pick the consultant to do the playground and then have them hire someone that does all this work, because I think this firm should be working directly for the city, when that happens.
I'm certainly happy to follow up. It's my sense that the RFQ, and you mentioned like parallel work, that with the RFP that many of you might have read about after the work session that council had this Saturday, this is a little more expansive, but I think that there are definitely some potential opportunities to connect some dots here as well. With what's going on, like that, not look at these things too small or individual-like. And so I think that before any construction would ever have to take place, that the engineering of elevations and all of that would be a necessary part of this. So.
But it's bigger than this
Sure,
one section.
just
And
this section.
the plan that the council is going to do to look for the 9 miles is even bigger than that. It is really a mitigation, sustainability, flood proofing, whatever those are. This is kind of a gut check of, do we want to approach Main Street Landing as a unified plan, or are we really back to doing it quarter block by quarter block? And I thought we want to move away from that. And I think that it is a gut check for all of us. And I don't want to bring this conversation any longer, but I think we need to think about this in those terms.
Okay.
Carl?
Well, Dee, you've raised a number of issues that bear some further discussion. So I understand what, if I understand you correctly, we're going to raise the level of the riverfront from the lock and dam to the sky bridge to the height of the railroad tracks. Is that basically what we're talking about doing?
Okay, so. Not the entire, anything that any improvement that you're
Well,
going
that's
to.
what I read the RFQ, was that it would be any improvement. So if there were child equipment or whatever, that would be up in the air.
Right.
But then there would be, I wouldn't know how to describe it other than lagoon access to the river in the areas that are still
So you were.
the height that they are at today.
Okay, so let's move to the piece that's the block between the playground and the dam. And those are walkways, natural areas with elevated areas. Well, you gotta construct, when are you gonna construct that? Because when you do that, then you can't get to the playground
Right.
from the parking lots
Right.
anymore.
Right.
So, I mean, I get this stuff all goes up, but really, we need to step back and think what needs to be done as the base when we're doing the playground. Is there more here? And I know that's not what a lot
Be
of people
ashamed to
want.
pave something to have to tear it out to get to the thing.
Or you
behind it.
can't get to it.
Pave on the other side of it. I follow you completely.
And I think it's worth just the kind of look, I mean, the RDG plan had, the wall going down and going into the river and then pulling this up and having lots of mounding. Are we gonna walk away from that? Okay, if it appears here we might be, because if you put this piece in, you probably won't have any space between the seawall and the playground equipment to be able to do that piece. You see what I'm saying?
I certainly do.
And so I think there's some discussion on our part, kind of like, what is the underlying elevations that should happen here as we go out with this
Zach?
consultant? Well,
You have a comment? Because it sounds like we're building the cart in front of the horse.
no, I don't think we are. I think this piece is, I think what they're doing and how this is going out is good, because that is really, the playground is really the focal point. But there could be, I mean, what is the preliminary, what should we be looking at the two segments? Say it is a building at the Sky Bridge. There's definitely earthwork that needs to be done there, right? And so how can that, what is that? How much would that be? And how does that fit in while this component's being done? I just think it's integrating the other two quarter blocks on either side of it for its rough work.
But I think in terms of the block that's east of the project site for the RFQ, there's going to be access at Pershing as part of the railroad, so that construction crews and equipment can get in that way to construct that eventual phase.
Of course.
Well, yeah, we're gonna do a new parking lot, we're gonna bring the construction crews in there, but where's the people coming in from then?
Pershing. I don't,
Pershing,
yeah,
when they're doing between Perry and Pershing,
well, so you're talking about like the bike path use and,
maybe. I mean, I think
Okay.
this thing needs to be kind of looked at now. It's not I'm not making a huge deal here.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's like big consultants. I just really think there's some staff work and some thinking through this portion of it. And the whole thought about these different elevations and how they fit. And I guess maybe a straight up rejection of the RDG plan. We should just be straight up about it, because do we like the intent of that work with the boulevards or not? I mean, that's not for you to answer. I mean,
No.
this is for
Us to
us to
answer.
question,
Right.
yes. And I think this is something we
Policy
need to
issue.
do as we go forward here. I mean, it's not holding anything up, but it's kind of our piece of work that we should be thinking about.
so for instance, for bike path access, I mean, we're constructing the eventual RFQ site. I mean, the bike path will probably have to be rerouted for that as well, so if we move that block further east, I mean, there's gonna be disruption in terms of getting people to and from the riverfront in those spots, so alleviated with the new connection at Pershing somewhat, but,
It would be nice to be able to have an integrated sidewalk from Pershing to this playground equipment that we could build. I just think, I mean, that next section is more of a free, open space. And so that's why I think we should look at what is those additional costs? What are we really thinking about here? And then when we get to the point of actually constructing, can this network work? That's what I'm thinking that we could do. I mean, Kyle, you're shaking your head a little bit. I think you might understand what I'm saying.
I think I definitely understand what you're saying, and to take it at a few different ways. We don't reject the RDG plan, but in my opinion, we don't stand pat for another 10 years until we need to do the 2030 plan and then go from there. For me, the city council, driven in large part by my desire to continue to improve the riverfront, is to continue to chunk away at a Main Street landing plan with the money that the city council has put into the CIP. In an ideal world, we would be able to put together a 30, 40, or $50 million package and implement that RDG plan. And I think that once we get the playground, we might have something that we can start to try to sell to people as a package a little bit better. I also think that the next 2 years is going to be very fluid and have a lot of opportunity, okay? Because as we put together what the flood protection package is going to look like, there's going to be opportunity for infrastructure improvements there. There might be opportunity to build in part of Main Street Landing with those infrastructure dollars. If you look at the way the build grants go now, they're infrastructure grants, but also they very much like quality of life improvements tied to legitimate infrastructure requests, which is why Burlington got their funding last year and we did not. So I think there's going to be opportunities to implement this stuff. We have to be working in concert, City Council, Riverfront Improvement Commission staff, and our whomever we get as an advisor through this RFP to work together to put these things in concert. And as far as the land formation and how many feet Main Street Landing is from the Sky Bridge to the government bridge, I think there might be a way to get potentially we could get all of that land formed within the same 2 years before the playground gets in. It's worth pursuing. I think it's worth pursuing. Yeah, if we can make it work financially, there's a lot of moving parts here. But we all need to continue to work in the same direction, and I think our goals are aligned, and that's my perspective.
Yeah, for me, with some staff noodling, we could see how far, if that's a pipe dream or if that's a part of a reality, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, one thing I was going to mention and I forgot is the way the RFQ is set up is that we have a base package for about $3.5 million, okay? And then we feel like this is a project that the state of Iowa might get behind with some money. We feel like we could go to the community and get some community partners to get behind this. And so there's a base package of $3.5 million that we have budgeted and secured through a Great Places grant, right? $500K for Iowa Great Places grant. But then the RFQ is also going to include add-on options, where if we are able to get state money, if we are able to get federal money, if we are able to get the business community to get behind this, then potentially you can do these add-ons. And what's in the add-ons? Is it terraforming the rest of Main Street Landing? That might be the best bang for our dollar. Is it adding a couple of the framed features at the riverfront? I mean, those are decisions that we have to make. It might be something that whoever wins the RFQ comes up with too, where they have ideas for what the add-ons can be. But there's an opportunity there as well.
I think that's an excellent point in terms of value added with the consultant team on board is they're going to come at it from the approach that here's the gravy train of 10, 20 years worth of work. So they're going to be adding little hints and things about how to connect these that are based in our master plan that we've done thus far. So throwing together River Vision, RDG, all those together, they're going to kind of put some feelers out. Oh, this is a good tie-in to the future if we do X.
Did you say we got a Great Places grant, or we're going to seek one? I missed that for this.
We currently have that status for this site.
Right, so we've been redesignated as a Iowa Great Place, and this year we will submit an application for this project. And I fully expect to receive some funding for that. How much depends upon how much is available.
So who's the applicant for that grant? Who will the applicant be?
Be the city.
Okay. It's in staff report.
I'll try this. I had mine all planned out tonight, but it's fun listening to all the different things. The good news is the lodge at Credit Island should be ready to go 6-8 weeks. And so Carl's going to book the first party and we can all go, and that'll be great. They're pretty excited to get that back in operation again. So that's kind of a mutual thing between all of us. Park-wise, the parties in the park start up again. I don't know if any of you have ever attended one. My opinion is you should. And also, I've been given permission to invite the Riverfront Commission to have a display at the parties in the park. It might be a chance to tell the public what you do, because actually, if you want to know the truth, many people do not know what the Riverfront Commission does. So Steve could come up with something brilliant, and you guys could have a booth at the parties in the park, like farmers market and all that. But I think that'd be an excellent idea for the Riverfront Commission. All the park activities will be on the website. There's some really cool things coming up. So if you want to check and help us promote it. I was at the meeting the other night. I was the same as Bill. When we started out, I was kind of like, well, you know, but as the night went on, some really cool ideas came out. A lot of great thoughts and different information that people didn't think of. So it'd be neat if we could do this in the next 6 weeks. But all these ideas, like you were saying, are going to start coming out. And I think it'll take time, but eventually the riverfront can be just magnificent. So I was just like him. It's like starting out, but then there's just some wonderful ideas. So I think it's going to be exciting as this progresses.